or just like he does both, but no one ever says, "Hey," takes into consideration one or the other. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like it's like, "Hey, go do this stuff to work on pitching, regardless of whether or not that helps or hurts quarterback, or go work on this on quarterback, regardless of whether or not that help or hurts pitching." Is that
Sure.
so? Or even number of throws and that sort of thing. Like, hey, if we throw so many quarterback throws, what do we need to slow down? Do we need to not do long toss today, or do we need to change what we do on that day? That sort of thing. Because
Sure.
off season crosses over into baseball season.
Okay. Okay. And let's talk about some of the differences between. How old is your son?
He is 16.
16. Okay. So
He's
he.
sitting here with me. I don't know if you can
Okay.
see him.
I can't see him. I can't see him back there, but that's
Yeah.
okay. That's okay. Uh, so let's talk about the differences between the quarter. Is he a pitcher?
Well, yes. I mean, he pitches some, so it's like
Okay.
that sort of thing.
Okay. Let's talk about the differences between the quarterback throwing motion and the pitcher's throwing motion first. Okay. Just real quick, some differences. So the quarterback throwing motion, you know, it's very short and compact. It doesn't require as much range of motion as a pitcher's. Um, the ball is heavier than a baseball. So when it comes to stress on the arm, especially at the elbow, it's not going to be as much because the velocity of the arm isn't as high. Okay, does that make sense? So
Yep.
since the ball is heavier, the arm isn't going to be as, from a velocity standpoint, isn't going to be coming through as fast, which isn't going to put as much stress on that elbow as a baseball throw would be. Okay. So with a baseball motion, especially with pitching, that stride length is a lot more. Okay, it requires a lot more range of motion. That the layback stage, so that cocking phase, is going to be a lot more. So you're going to require a lot more range of motion in both arms to be able to do that the right way. Okay, so those are some of the differences between each motion. Okay, now the similarities is the fact that if they're both unilateral rotational movements, both throwing movements. Okay, the release point of the ball it could be similar, but depending on how you throw a baseball versus throw a football, that's going to be all very individualized because some baseball players release it a little bit lower, which is going to put more tensile force on the elbow, okay, versus a higher release. Quarterbacks should always have a high release, so you're not going to see many problems when it comes to throwing a football. All right, so guys tend to be able to throw a football a lot if they're doing it in an efficient manner. If they're doing it where they don't have any shoulder impingement or they don't have any tendonitis at the elbow, tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, low back pain, those are the injuries that you usually see with a quarterback, or those nagging, painful injuries that just kind of last for a long time if you don't manage those the right way. But if you're a guy that can rotate well and you do it efficiently, you shouldn't have problems throwing the football. Now with a baseball, especially at his age, because I kind of had a similar problem, is I was a quarterback and a pitcher, so I had a bad, what they call a avulsion fracture. So the Tommy John surgery you hear about all the time, that's whenever that ligament pulls off of the humerus. Well, I actually had that ligament pull the bone off of the humerus. So it's a little bit different injury because that heals a lot easier. It's easier to pin the bone back in versus having to put that ligament back in. So the recovery time was shorter, but similar injury. And the mechanism of why I got the injury was the same. Okay, it's just too much throwing over a period of time. So what I would say from a recommendation standpoint with a football, okay, if you're in season during baseball, throw the football sparingly, okay, if you want to, because since the mechanics are a little bit different, there's also going to be this balance of understanding if practicing your throwing motion affects your baseball pitching motion, because for some guys it does. All right, if there's a pitcher, because some guys will have a very distinct motion whenever they pitch, the release point is a lot lower, So if I practice throwing a football and it's a higher release, just from a neuromuscular standpoint and motor learning standpoint, that can actually interfere with my motion. So there's always this constant battle and balance between understanding what am I working towards during that period of time. If I'm in season with baseball, maybe I don't throw the football as much. If I'm a guy that has a technique problem whenever I throw a football versus a baseball, and then vice versa. So if you don't, and from a volume standpoint, if you can withstand throwing the football during that time, then go for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's all very individualized when it comes to what the context of what you're looking at, the time of the year, body type. I mean, all of those variables kind of play a role in determining how much you should throw and if you're going to throw baseball versus throw football.
Okay. So if like we work with you or whatever, what are we looking at? I mean, what do you work on? What are we looking to improve, that sort of thing?
Well, I think it all depends on what y'all are looking for, because we offer a variety of services. We do a lot of teaching the biomechanics of throwing motion. We do a lot of programming for the weight room, whether it's on the rehab side of things or on the strength and conditioning side of things. We offer a variety of things. So I think it's whatever you need, and because if you're 16, I mean, what are your goals? What are your goals?
Go to college to play.
Okay. Baseball or football?
Probably football.
Okay. Okay. So if baseball is just a supplementary thing for you, have you ever had any pain in the elbow or low back or any issues over time when it comes to that thing? Because that's the only the thing that I think would be holding you back from football would be if you're pitching too much or throwing too much with the baseball and it's causing you pain, which is causing you to miss time on the football field for practicing your skills.
Have you had anything like that?
Well,
Only thing he had in baseballs, they did some. How did you hurt it?
you just hitting.
Oh, he hurt the inside of his elbow hitting, swinging, but
Okay.
never. He's not had any. I mean, every once in a while, is your shoulder sore when you throw a whole bunch?
Yeah.
His shoulder will be sore, but never had elbow problems like on the outside or anything.
Okay.
Like it was more like a forearm strain almost from swinging the bat.
Yeah.
But that's so far, like elbow things. Have you had any pain? Nothing on that.
Okay. So,
and I don't know if you heard him. He said he wants to be, I guess, efficiently biomechanically. Is that what you're looking for?
yeah, for sure. And it's so I would wait for if we were going to work with y'all, it'd be one of those things where I want to know exactly what your weight room program looks like, what you're doing right now, and then what your goals are from a baseball and football standpoint, so we can balance all of those things at the same time, because the programming is going to look very different, probably from month to month, depending on what season you're in and what sport you're in, but also understanding and being able to gauge if you're making improvements physically to continue to increase force production, whether it's increasing velocity on your throws or getting stronger in the weight room so you can get bigger, faster, stronger. Because at some point, too, there's this tipping point where as I get bigger, faster, stronger, I start to lose ranges of motion. So my performance goes here, and it can actually go down if I'm too big and too strong. So if I start losing ranges of motion, especially rotational ranges of motion in my shoulders and my hips, that takes away from my ability to rotate as a baseball player and a football player. And as a quarterback. So if I can understand, manage the lifts in the weight room of what you're doing, so we're not getting into that realm where you're starting to decrease performance, I think is super important, because a lot of guys don't have that, and they'll want to increase their bench press from 225 to 275, but it doesn't help them on the field at all. It actually makes them a worse player, because if I get stronger and I compress my chest, I'm gonna start to steal some of the range of motion in my shoulders, which is going to cause me pain and it cause me more dysfunction in my throwing motion. So it's just like, well, how am I spending my time? And I got to spend my time wisely and efficiently to help my performance. We call them key performance indicators, to make sure that you're getting better over a period of time, and just be able to objectively progress that over time is kind of where we think that we really strive to get to, and we're pretty good at.
So how do we balance that with, like, hey, the coach says do this workout, and they have the chart that says, you know, you're doing 50% or 75% or whatever of your max on these lifts versus,
Mhm.
you know, hey, coach, that may not be what's best for me as a quarterback. I mean, is that something we address with the coaches, or I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
how do you suggest we handle that?
that's tough. That's tough to manage. That's a great question, and that's something that it depends on the personality of the coach too, because I think a lot of coaches will get very defensive if you try to go against what they're trying to do. But there's always variations to those lifts that can be beneficial and not detrimental in nature. So instead of a back squat, you could do like a heavy, we call it a goblet squat. So just you can load that like kettlebell or dumbbell in the front and do the same squatting technique, but not have all the issues that you have by doing a back squat where you're in this very extended position, because most athletes tend to be stiff in certain areas and not move very well in that position. So they start to compensate, and they can still do it, but they don't do it like they need to do it. So they start compensating and having some of these strategies where they start to lose range of motion in places, but also, you know, if you're a guy that doesn't have very good hip mobility or ankle mobility and you're doing a squat, well, your low back's going to feel a brunt of that. And for a pitcher or a rotational athlete, that's not what you want. So just keeping those things in mind, it's you can always work around that, because there's still variations of the lifts that you can do, whether it be unilateral movements or variations of the big compound movements that can still be beneficial, but just different in nature, where you won't get those side effects.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess the hard part about that is like saying, you know, everybody else is on one plan and you're on a different
Sure.
plan, so to speak, and, you know, versus, hey, is he really in on the team thing versus he doing his own thing?
And that's sure. I I get that, and that's the biggest problem I think we have right now, and especially in the weight room for quarterbacks, is that very issue, where it's because the plan needs to be different. The plan for a wide receiver and a lineman should be different, you know? So that's just the nature of the beast right now in this moment in time, but that has to change. But I think there's other ways that you can go about still being a leader and doing the things necessary and showing that you're a guy that wants to work and still be on a different plan, you know, as far as still spending the time and effort in the weight room. And if it's different, it's just different. It doesn't make it less hard. It's just different in nature, where you're going to have different adaptations with the exercises and the prescription of what you're doing. So those are all questions where if I had a better gauge of the personality of the strength coach and the head coach, I'd be able to answer those a little bit better, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we know the head coach pretty good. He took over last year. And I mean, he played baseball for him too. So we have a good relationship with him. It'd just be whether or not the team thing, whether or not he'd be like willing to say, hey, you're going to be on an individual plan. But does anybody else do individual plans, or does everybody pretty much do the same?
They do like whatever we're supposed to do with off season, but then like after they go and do their own thing.
So they do the off-season lists, and then they go do position-specific stuff.
Or just like their own workout of whatever they need to do.
The coach gives it to them, or they make up their own?
They have their own.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough, it's tough to balance that. It really is. 'Cause
Right.
I've been there too. And coaches always tell you to work through pain too. So it's just one of those things where you might be getting stronger, but you might be diving deeper into that hole of decreasing your performance as a rotational athlete, but also increasing injury risk, which is not a fun area to be in. That was the area that my brothers and I were always in as quarterbacks, where we always had these nagging injuries. I think that's why we're so passionate about what we do now, is because you don't need to have all of those things. And a lot of times being a big, strong quarterback isn't necessarily increasing your performance either. So,
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, you look at NFL quarterbacks generally. I mean, minus Roethlisberger and some of those guys, but they're not, behemoths in the weight room looking
no,
anyway.
no, there's these taller, slender guys that have these very helical structures in their thorax and their pelvis where they can rotate on that axis really well. That's the name of the game. Is just these long, slender guys that have these long arms and long legs that they can produce high forces in, but they can do it in a way where they can rotate around that helical structure. So